right now we're just going to be talking about my LSAT Flex experience, and I'm going to have some things I would like to say about my experience that may be helpful to other people who are going to take it in the future, how LSAT has helped me go through the difficulties that I've had with the with the LSAT Flex. And then I'm also going to be asking you some questions that I will need in the future because I'm going to be retaking it. And I just want to make sure that I'm on this path, that I can set myself up for success. And this time for the second time around. Before I took the LSAT Flex, I started studying around January, and then my exam was in June. So I took that whole time to study. In between, I was taking classes, and then I was, throughout my summer, I had that free time. So I really delved deep into my studying. So there was a lot of balancing that I had to do. So with my LSAT Flex experience, the day of my exam, I've had a lot of situations that occurred. You have to expect the worst, when these things happen. But overall, the way they handled it was well. So one thing that I had to go through was disruptions several times due to Wi-Fi. I couldn't connect with a proctor in time. I was waiting there almost an hour before my exam really began. And so I think one thing that's important to know when these things happen is to not have that get into your head, too much, because the thing is, you are there and you want to perform your best. But I believe something that I took away from that is even when something bad occurs, you still have to perform to the best of your ability on that day. I know from other people that I've talked to, there are times when you lose your Wi-Fi, and when that exits out, you have to go through the process of signing in again, identifying yourself, and stuff like that. And that had happened to me like 2 times. One time during my logic game section, which when that cuts out in the middle and you're trying to, get finish everything, it was really stressful. And so I didn't perform the best, and I knew that. But then I cut several more times throughout my reading comprehension. And I was completely cut out nearing the end of my reading comp. And that it devastated me on that day. So something that I took from that is, when you have those times in between where before you cut out, just try your best to, perform to the best of your ability, because you really feel it at the end of the day, whether you did your best. So after that experience occurred, I had to reach out to LSAC because I knew that the score that I was going to get after that exam was not a representative of how much I studied on that day. I know I could have done better. And so I talked to the LSAT people, and they were really understanding. I was very surprised because I know that in the past, people have had experiences where they were not very understanding, but the LSAT has done a lot for those people who are taking the LSAT Flex. And what they allowed me to do was either they were going to sign me up for August, which I decided not to do because I needed a break, or I could get a discount off in the future. And so I decided that, instead, so that I had more time to study. And so, yeah, I have so many questions in terms of what I can do next time around, because I know there were some things at the day of the test that I knew I was lacking. So may I ask you some questions then?
Yes, please go right ahead.
Okay, so I noticed, and I know that a lot of people go through this, is that they can experience a plateau with their scores when it comes to taking exams. So like I would continuously make 140s, 140, 140, 140, and that lasted for me for about a month before I hit the 150s. And so now that I'm starting again for the second time studying for the LSAT, I just imagine like people have done this before me before, where they had to retake an exam. And I just wanted to know how I guess I can mentally prepare myself for the second time around, and not to feel discouraged that I'm doing this again for the second time, and really like how I can be more effective the second time around. I know
Yeah.
that was a lot to put on, but I can repeat.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And happy to break this down piece by piece. So first is, you mentioned the plateau.
Right.
Plateaus are incredibly common, and the key is to change something about your approach. It could be using a different resource, or it could simply be literally changing how you approach a given section or a different question type. There are
Right.
many different ways to go about all sections of the exam, all question types. Let's say for reading comp, for example, do you take notes or do you not? How many notes do you take? Are you taking them on scratch paper or are you using the annotation tools? In games, it could be, are you looking to make lots of inferences up front or not? Are you using previous work and previous scenarios or not? So whatever you're doing, if you're stuck, try doing the opposite. Maybe you'll meet in the middle. Maybe the opposite way works better, or maybe you'll stick with what you're doing, but at least you'll know that you've experimented with those different areas.
Right, right. So not just staying stuck in one study tool, I guess, just like being able to experiment and pushing out of what I've been doing in the past.
Exactly. So it could be a different resource, like a different prep option, like a different
Mhm.
course, a different book, a different coach, a different tutor, or it could literally simply be how you go about you approaching this section. And that's one thing I bring into a lot into my coaching and into my courses is helping you find some play in this and trying out different things.
Right.
So that's one thing I'll suggest. You also talked about retaking, and you said
Mhm.
you took the LSAT Flex, was it July
I
or
took it
June?
in June.
Okay, June. Okay, so you took it in June. You decided to give it a few more months. You're now going for October, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got a little bit of a gap there, which means you have plenty of time to experiment as I suggested. So I would recommend
Mhm.
taking full advantage of that, doing a handful of reading comp passages one way, a handful another way, see what works. As for retaking in
Right.
general, just know that first off, it's incredibly common. Most people
Mhm.
retake and have a reason to retake in part because law schools don't average multiple scores. They only take the highest. So if you do better, great. If not, no big deal. And with a few more months of studying, I expect you'll probably do better. And you also have
Right.
all the benefit of what you've done with the Flex up to this point. You have the same format. I mean, they haven't announced October yet, but I feel pretty
Yeah.
certain it's going to be a Flex. And I imagine from your expression, you probably feel the same.
Yeah. I'm pretty confident it's going to be a flex.
Yeah, yeah. So you know what it's going to be like, and you know what potential issues could arise. You talked about things like your Wi-Fi connection being shaky and such. And so there are
Yeah.
things you can do. One thing you should know about is that LSAC will pay for you to take it at a hotel.
I've recently learned about that, and I find that really amazing. I'm going to take advantage of that because I know where I am. I don't want to risk having those Wi-Fi disruptions again, so I will take advantage.
Definitely. So that could be a game changer right there to avoid all of those interruptions that could get in
Right,
the way.
right.
And you also have the experience of dealing with the ProctorU system, dealing with the setup and tech and everything like that. So that
Hmm.
alone could make it go more smoothly.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. And what were some of
Um,
the other challenges and questions you had?
I think another thing is really the mental health aspect of it because I know it can get overwhelming to people who have to retake it again because you've dedicated, several hours of your time. You've had to make a lot of sacrifices, and then you have to do that again, for the second time. And so I just want to know like how I can really prepare myself mentally and how I can go about approaching this for the second time around.
Yeah, sure. So what are some of the biggest struggles you see around extending your LSAT prep journey for a longer period?
Um, One thing is I'm like very stressed out, because I want to make sure that I can apply for this cycle, which it is not uncommon to apply later in the cycle. But I I'm very, I want to do things at a certain time. And so I guess part of it is I want to apply on time. And I, I'm just thinking about all those books and all those hours I had to spend, studying for these things. And so I guess I'm just feeling overwhelmed already for the second time.
I hear you. So one couple things there. One is where you fall within the application timeline for applying to start law school in fall 2021, potentially.
Right.
And then secondly is the overall duration of your LSAT prep journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll address each of those separately. First is the timeline. And I'll ask you, what is late? How do we define late with law school admissions?
Well, I've been at the schools I've been looking at, it's been around the spring semesters where I usually see it cut. But there are some schools that I want to apply for their scholarships, and I just want to make sure I want to apply around the fall instead of, having to risk not having that scholarship money. But also, I'm still trying to get to know the law school process and how they give out scholarships and whether it does actually influence whether you apply in the fall or in the spring.
Right. And so you said that you're taking it in October.
Right.
You get the October LSAT's October 3rd. You'll get your score back about 2 to 3 weeks later.
Right.
And you can hit submit on your applications then. So that would mean you're applying in mid to late October.
Right.
So is that late?
I mean, that's the thing. I just have to hope that I get that score the second time.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, maybe November's in the running.
Right.
If you took the November LSAT on November 14th, you get your score back about 2 to 3 weeks later, putting you into early December.
Okay. Yeah, that helps putting it into perspective.
So people are taking the LSAT in January, February, March, and still applying that cycle. And that I would view as late. Anything doing it, taking the LSAT and applying the same calendar year to start law school that very fall, that is a little bit on the later side. But October, November, as long as you're applying in fall 2020 to start fall 2021, it's totally fine. And with the October LSAT right now, applications open September, you're applying within a month or two.
Right. Okay, that helps.
It's not late. And then, of course, if you get even a few points more by taking it in November and applying then, even if October was your initial date that you have on the agenda right now, totally worth it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure. So
And
the other
then,
thing we talked about was duration, right?
Right, the duration, the mental stamina, trying not to get burnt out because, October will be coming around the corner, and I'm also graduating this semester. So having that mental endurance and trying not to overwhelm myself right before I'm beginning, to study again.
Yeah, sure. So I'll ask you a couple questions here. First is, in the grand scheme of everything you've done in the academic world up to this point, how would you rate the LSAT in comparison to other stuff you've done in terms of difficulty?
I will say I'm very happy that I decided to take a major that I'm passionate about. So comparing it to the LSAT is more difficult.
Yeah, so LSAT as compared to, let's say, did you take the SAT or the ACT?
Right, yes. Yes, it is more difficult.
Have you ever taken any other graduate level admissions exams like the GRE?
No.
Okay, well, LSAT's harder than all of them.
Yes.
It's harder than all of them. So the idea here is that maybe it makes sense that it would take longer to study for.
Right.
How long did you study for June?
About 6 months.
And how consistent was that studying?
It was very consistent. Every week I would study, every day leading up to that point, I would study about 6 hours. And then during around Saturdays or Sundays, I would take a prep test.
So 6 hours pretty much every day. And then on the weekends, you were doing full-length exams.
Yes.
This
And
was
then
for
we're
6 months?
yes, for 6 months.
Wow.
I was
Yeah.
very dedicated. And so you can imagine my disappointment when my Wi-Fi situation came up. But yes, I was very dedicated. I did take breaks though. Like I'm not a superwoman. So I did have at least some days off here or there, but I was very consistent in terms of my studying.
Wow. Well, I'm going to say you are a superwoman because that is a tremendous feat to maintain for that long. So kudos to you
I
for your
tried.
dedication there.
Thank you.
Now, it's a lot of work. You also raised the idea of burnout. And I now see why you raised that idea, because that is a fairly grueling schedule to maintain for such a long period of time. You clearly recognize the
Right.
LSAT's importance as well as its difficulty. And then you have this Wi-Fi issue come up,
Yeah.
which I imagine
I,
was a significant portion of why you're looking to retake now.
yes. Yes. Yeah. And it's really why I wanted to talk to you about how I can make a more reasonable schedule, because I know if I continue a schedule like that, I will not be able to, my mental health will not be able to keep up with it.
Sure.
So,
And on top of the LSAT prep, you're also in school. You talked about graduating. So you have academic,
right.
you have other classes in the mix on top of all that.
Of course, yes. I have a lot of classes. I have exams to take, and I'm taking a thesis class. So I have a thesis paper to complete before graduation.
Yes, you've got a lot on your plate.
Yes. And I know I will not be able to do that 6 hour a day schedule.
And you may not need to. You may not need to. It could be that you improve. You may not need to gain any additional understanding of the exam and simply have your Wi-Fi be good, and that might be enough. On top of that, if you do a bit of studying over the next, we're speaking now end of July, so you've got about 2 months till October. Over the next 2 months, just stay fresh. That might be all you need to do. Could be.
Okay.
Or alternatively, maybe you want to do some light studying on weak areas on top of doing a prep test once a week just to stay fresh. And that might be enough.
Okay. So just really feeling out like how I am.
Yeah.
So far. Okay.
Your understanding level at this point may be enough to, if you could take the LSAT tomorrow, maybe you'd be good. It's hard to say. We haven't worked together closely enough for me to know that, but I can say that if you stay fresh and do an exam every week and review it, given what you've done up to this point, you might not need more than that.
Okay. Okay. I'll keep that in mind coming up for this schedule. Oh, I think I have one more question. So I've seen a lot of your videos about reading comprehension, because I've mentioned before in my other posts that by far reading comprehension is my weakest, and a lot of it has to do with mental fatigue. Do you recommend any sites or anything I can do in my free time for reading comp that will help me, develop those skills?
Yeah, sure. People will talk about The Economist and Scientific American, and those are nice, but you've got plenty of actual reading comprehension passages available to you to work on. And so even just reading those casually and getting the main idea out of them would be worthwhile.
Okay.
I'm also going to recommend 2 websites for you. One is called phrasereader.com.
Okay.
The other is called spreeder.com, SPREEDER. And basically what you can do on these sites is you can copy paste text into a field and display it to yourself at different speeds, like putting yourself on a reading treadmill to increase your reading speed on screen.
Okay. So it's like a speed reading, trying to develop that. Okay.
Exactly. Those could be helpful. And then just reading more passages, even if you don't solve all the questions, just seeing, can you get the main idea? Can you get the author's opinion? Nearly 100 released exams means nearly 400 passages. You may not get to all of them. And so even just pulling out some of those old ones to study or read in a more casual sense could be useful too.
Okay. And do you recommend, I know you said casual, but do you recommend, like having at least a timer when I'm doing those, or just, having a more laid back approach?
More laid back, no timer. This is not, first off, I would never time individual passages.
Okay.
845 is simply an average. Some are easier, some are harder. timing only makes sense in the context of an entire section as it was administered in the published exam.
Okay.
There's one other thing I wanted to circle back to about duration. You talked about having studied for 6 months. I recommend 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential on the exam. And you may be there already. It's just that you need the Wi-Fi to work properly. The second thing is that there are people who study for a year.
That's true.
Maybe not quite as consistently as you did, but it can take a long time to get where you need to go. And people retake it 2, 3, 4 times. Obviously, you don't want to do it that many times, and 5 takes starts to look a little bit iffy, but taking it 2 or 3 times, even 4, is not uncommon.
Okay. I know one of my friends told me that you have enough time and not to stress yourself out. If I had to take a gap year, that's totally fine. Yeah, and that's been an advice that has been given to me, so.
Sure. Well, I have a feeling about given your dedication up to this point, and even with balancing everything, I think you'll be able to give it what it needs over the next 2 months.
Thank you.
Of course, Nicole. Well, this was a great conversation. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think the biggest insight that I got from my call is, I guess, you put into perspective my timeline situation, which was the biggest thing that was at the back of my mind, because I don't mean to get all philosophical, but society really makes us think that we have to do things very quickly. And so when you put into perspective that I have October and November, and that people even take this for a year and study longer than that, it really eased the stress that I have been feeling ever since the last LSAT flex that I took, because I was very distraught from what happened. So I'm very grateful for that.
Of course, Nicole. I'm really glad to help. Please keep in touch and let me know if you need anything at all moving forward. I'll share with you some links as well to resources if you want to share them with anybody on your end too.
Thank you. And I'll reach out to you if I have any further questions.
Definitely, please do.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.